His mother just realized why God kept you silent, and it shook her. Before you realize it, something unseen has already begun to shift. There was a reason the silence wrapped around you like a shield. There was a reason your voice was restrained while others spoke freely. And now, someone who never expected to understand is awakening to the truth. Listen carefully. What you are about to hear is not comfort, it is confirmation. You were not ignored. You were not forgotten. You were not weak. You were withheld. I speak to you now because the moment has arrived when what was hidden can no longer remain concealed. The silence God placed upon you was never punishment. It was containment. There was power in you that would have been destroyed if it had been released too early. So heaven restrained your tongue while sharpening your spirit. Others mistook your quiet for submission. They misread your restraint as fear. Even those closest to the situation, especially her, believed the story that made the most sense to them. But God was writing a different one. There are eyes opening right now that once looked past you. There is a heart softening that once judged you without understanding. The realization is sudden, unsettling, and deeply emotional. She is replaying moments in her mind, your stillness, your patience, the way you endured without explanation, and something does not add up anymore. Because silence like yours does not come from weakness. It comes from command. God kept you quiet because your words would have dismantled illusions too soon. There were bonds that needed to expose themselves by their own behavior. There were masks that had to slip without your intervention. If you had spoken, you would have been blamed. If you had defended yourself, the truth would have been distorted. So heaven said, "Wait." And you waited, even when it hurt. There were nights you questioned yourself. Days you wondered if staying quiet was costing you everything. But every withheld response was recorded. Every tear swallowed back was counted. Every moment you chose dignity over reaction was building something irreversible. Now comes the shaking. She is beginning to see that your silence forced others to reveal who they truly were. That your lack of reaction exposed motives no argument ever could. And this realization is not gentle, it is jarring. It is unsettling her sleep. It is forcing her to confront what she dismissed, what she misjudged, what she allowed. Because if God kept you silent, what was He protecting? And what was He preparing to expose? This is the point where the narrative collapses. You were never meant to explain yourself to people who benefited from misunderstanding you. God needed the truth to arrive without your voice, so no one could accuse you of manipulation. When the revelation comes this way, it carries divine weight. It cannot be argued with. It cannot be denied. And now the atmosphere is changing. You may feel it, an invisible pressure lifting, a strange calm replacing the ache. That is not coincidence. That is alignment. The season of silence is cracking, and those who once spoke about you are beginning to realize why you never spoke for yourself. This is where authority returns. Not through shouting. Not through revenge. But through vindication. Stay attentive now. What unfolds next will not require effort from you, only awareness. The same silence that once restrained you is about to become the loudest testimony in the room. And when the full truth finishes surfacing, the reaction will be impossible to hide. Because this realization is only the beginning, and what she is about to understand next will shake far more than her thoughts. The realization does not arrive gently. It does not whisper, it collides. Once the first layer of understanding breaks, everything beneath it begins to tremble. She is no longer asking if something was missed, she is asking how much. Memories are resurfacing with new meaning. Your quiet presence. Your refusal to defend yourself. The moments she thought you were passive, disconnected, or simply unaware. Now those same moments feel heavy. Because silence like yours creates reflection. And reflection is uncomfortable for those who once felt certain they were right. You must understand this. The silence God placed over you did not only protect you, it confronted others. It forced them to sit with their assumptions. It gave them space to act without resistance, to reveal their intentions without obstruction. And as time passed, patterns emerged. Words contradicted actions. Stories collapsed under their own weight. That is when realization turns into disturbance. She is beginning to recognize that your restraint was unnatural, not human hesitation, but divine control. No ordinary person remains composed under such pressure. No ordinary heart absorbs such injustice without reacting. And that is exactly what is unsettling her now. Because if God was involved, then everything she believed must be re-examined. There is guilt surfacing, but it is mixed with fear. Fear that she stood on the wrong side of something sacred. Fear that she mistook obedience for weakness and patience for compliance. And fear, most of all, that she may have opposed what heaven was quietly sustaining. This is where the inner conflict intensifies. She is replaying conversations she never had with you. Words she assumed you didn't have. Strength she never credited you for. And the more she looks back, the clearer it becomes. Your silence created space for truth to mature. You did not interrupt the process. You allowed God to complete His work. That realization carries weight. It is not admiration yet, but it is respect forming under pressure. And respect born this way is not optional. It forces acknowledgement. It demands humility. Do not mistake this moment. This is not about apology, not yet. This is about recognition. Recognition that you were not silent because you lacked courage, but because you possessed discernment. Recognition that you did not speak because heaven instructed you to observe. Recognition that while others were performing, you were being prepared. And preparation always precedes elevation. You may feel something shifting around you now, subtle changes in tone, body language, attention. People are watching more closely, listening more carefully. The same ones who once overlooked you are recalibrating their perception, trying to understand what they missed. That is because the silence has expired. Not all at once, but enough for clarity to enter the room. What comes next will not require confrontation. God is not asking you to explain. Heaven does not need your justification. The truth is assembling itself without your effort, and that is the most powerful form of revelation. Because when God reveals without your voice, the conclusion becomes undeniable. She will soon realize something deeper, something that unsettles her even more. That your silence did not just expose others, it protected her from consequences she was not ready to face. If you had spoken earlier, the collapse would have been immediate. But God allowed mercy to extend while understanding matured. That is a sobering truth. And it changes how she sees you. What once felt like distance now feels like restraint. What once looked like indifference now looks like discipline. And what once seemed like absence now feels like authority withheld for a higher purpose. This is where your role transforms. You are no longer the quiet one in the background. You are the reference point. The one whose presence carries weight without words. The one whose stillness now commands attention. People sense it, even if they cannot explain it. That is divine authority. Remain steady. Do not rush to speak. Do not feel compelled to clarify. The unveiling is still in motion, and timing remains crucial. There is more she has not yet connected. One final realization is approaching. One that will shift not just her perception of you, but her understanding of God's involvement entirely. And when that realization lands, it will change how everyone around you responds. Stay ready. The silence may lift, but what replaces it will be far more powerful than words. Because the next truth about to surface will make it impossible for anyone to ever question why God kept you quiet. If you feel the tension building, you are exactly where you need to be. Something deeper is stirring now, beyond realization, beyond discomfort. What is rising is reverence, even if she does not yet know that is what it is. Because there comes a moment when understanding crosses a threshold. When the mind can no longer rationalize away what the spirit has already recognized. She is standing at that edge now, sensing that your silence was not merely guided by God, but guarded by Him. This is where awe begins to replace doubt. She is noticing how events rearrange themselves around you without your interference. How situations resolved, or collapsed, without you lifting a finger. How those who once felt powerful around you began to unravel on their own. Patterns like that do not happen accidentally. And they do not happen often. That is when the question forms, quiet but piercing. What kind of person is kept silent by God Himself? Because heaven does not restrain voices without reason. Silence is not given to the weak, it is assigned to those whose words carry consequence. God does not delay expression unless premature release would disrupt a larger design. And suddenly she understands that your restraint was strategic, not circumstantial. You were not late. You were not hesitant. You were precisely on time, just not yet released. This realization is changing how she remembers you. Moments that once felt insignificant now feel charged. Your presence feels heavier in hindsight. Your eyes seem more observant. Your pauses more intentional. It is as though she is seeing you again for the first time, but through a lens sharpened by truth. And this is unsettling. Because it suggests that while others were acting, you were seeing. While others were speaking, you were measuring. While others were convinced they understood the situation, you were positioned above it. Waiting for clarity to emerge without distortion. That level of restraint does not come from fear. It comes from alignment. You aligned yourself with timing rather than emotion. With instruction rather than impulse. And alignment always attracts divine backing. This is what she is beginning to grasp now, that your silence was not passive, it was obedient. And obedience draws authority. She may not say it out loud, but she feels it. If God trusted you with silence, He must also trust you with power. That realization carries both respect and intimidation. Because power that does not announce itself is the most dangerous kind, not destructive, but decisive. It does not need validation. It does not seek permission. It simply waits until the moment is correct, and then it moves. And that is what is approaching now. You may sense it in the air, a quiet expectancy, like the pause before thunder. People around you are adjusting unconsciously. Their tone shifts. Their confidence wavers. They are no longer sure how to position themselves in relation to you, because the version of you they thought they understood no longer fits. That is what happens when truth begins to surface without explanation. You are not changing, but perception is. And perception changes behavior. She is realizing something else now, something even more sobering, that your silence removed her ability to justify her stance. If you had argued, she could have dismissed you. If you had defended yourself, she could have labeled you emotional or defensive. But because you said nothing, there was nothing to deflect. Only time. Only outcomes. Only results. And results speak with finality. This is why the silence was essential. It allowed consequences to form without interference. It allowed motives to reveal themselves without accusation. It allowed God to separate truth from narrative without your involvement. You were not spared the pain, but you were spared the blame. That is divine protection. Now, as this awareness deepens, something else is happening within her: humility. Not the performative kind, but the internal kind that quietly reorders priorities. She is beginning to understand that she stood near something sacred without recognizing it. That she observed restraint without honoring it. And that realization is heavy. Because it means she misjudged not just you, but God's work through you. This is where the shift becomes irreversible. From this point forward, she cannot return to the old perception. The image has cracked. The truth has entered. And once truth is seen, it demands response, even if that response is silent acknowledgement. Do not rush this moment. Do not interrupt it. The process is still unfolding. There is one final layer she has not yet reached, a realization so clarifying that it will redefine how she sees authority, timing, and divine intention altogether. When that layer breaks, it will not just explain your silence. It will explain everything that is about to change next. Stay steady. What comes after this understanding will require discernment, not words. Because the next movement will not happen quietly. And when it begins, there will be no mistaking why you were chosen to wait. Now the atmosphere tightens, not with fear, but with inevitability. Because once understanding reaches this depth, it demands movement. What has been realized cannot remain dormant. She is no longer observing from a distance. The awareness has crossed into her conscience, and conscience does not allow neutrality. This is where the weight truly settles. She understands now that your silence was not only protection. It was permission. Permission for God to act without obstruction. Permission for outcomes to mature fully. Permission for truth to arrive without being rushed, diluted, or defended. And that changes everything. Because it means heaven trusted you with restraint at a level most never reach. God does not ask everyone to be quiet. He asks those whose words could shift power structures, expose hidden loyalties, and force premature reckonings. Your silence was not the absence of influence. It was influence delayed. That is what she is grasping now, and it is unsettling her deeply. She sees that if you had spoken, alliances would have fractured too soon. If you had explained yourself, others would have hidden more carefully. If you had reacted, the story would have shifted away from truth and toward drama. But because you stayed still, everything unfolded unprotected. Nothing concealed itself from time. This is where realization becomes reverence. She is beginning to treat your presence differently, not consciously at first, but instinctively. There is more caution now. More listening. Fewer assumptions. Because somewhere within her, she senses that you are aligned with something larger than the situation she thought she understood. That alignment carries authority. Not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that commands it. You may notice it now. The way conversations pause when you enter a space, the way people check themselves before speaking around you, the way opinions soften or shift without explanation. This is not coincidence. This is the after effect of restrained power. Silence creates gravity. And gravity eventually pulls truth to the surface. She is also realizing something more personal now, something that humbles her. That your silence forced her to confront herself. Without your words to respond to, she was left alone with her interpretations, her judgments, her choices. And in that stillness, self-deception had nowhere to hide. This is why the realization shook her. Because it means the discomfort she feels now did not come from you, it came from clarity. And clarity always arrives uninvited. Do not misunderstand this stage. This is not the moment for validation. This is not the time to expect acknowledgement. This is a private reckoning unfolding in her spirit, and private reckonings are often the most transformative. God is not finished yet. There is still a shift being prepared, not just in perception, but in positioning. You are moving from being observed to being considered. From being dismissed to being weighed. From being silent to being anticipated. And anticipation changes dynamics. People begin to wonder what you know, what you see, what you will say when you finally speak. That curiosity is not about information, it is about authority. They sense that when your voice is released, it will not be casual. It will not be reactive. It will carry consequence. That is why heaven waited. You were not being hidden. You were being established. There is a reason this message resonates so deeply with you now. A reason you feel the intensity building rather than fading. You are being prepared not just to witness the shift, but to stand correctly within it. And for those who feel called to walk deeper into this kind of understanding, to remain aligned in sharpened discernment as these transitions unfold, there are spaces designed for that depth. Quiet places where clarity is strengthened and timing is honored, where commitment is not loud, but intentional. Some recognize that when the moment comes, choosing to stand closer, to press in more deliberately, matters. They understand that alignment is not accidental, it is chosen. You are approaching that threshold now. The silence that once surrounded you is thinning, not because it failed, but because it succeeded. It has done its work. It has filtered motives, exposed intentions, and prepared the ground. What comes next will not look like chaos, but it will feel decisive. She is close now, very close, to the final realization. The one that explains not only your silence, but why certain doors are about to open for you while others quietly close behind you. This next understanding will not just reshape how she sees you. It will redefine how she understands God's timing altogether. Remain steady. Remain observant. Because when that final truth lands, it will mark the end of waiting, and the beginning of something that cannot be reversed. Now the final understanding arrives, not as shock, but as clarity. It settles slowly, then all at once, like light filling a room that was never dark, only misunderstood. She sees it now with unmistakable precision. Your silence was not an isolated season. It was a threshold. A dividing line between who you were required to be then, and who you are being released to become now. This is the moment everything aligns. She understands that God did not keep you silent because you were unfinished, but because others were. Your voice would have outpaced their readiness. Your truth would have demanded responses they were incapable of giving without collapsing. So heaven delayed your expression until accountability could stand on its own. That realization reframes everything. You were not delayed, you were preserved. Not restrained, you were positioned. Not quiet, you were contained. And containment always precedes expansion. This is why the shift you feel now is so strong. The weight has not disappeared, it has redistributed. What once pressed inward is now preparing to move outward. Not recklessly, not emotionally, but with precision. She sees now that your silence was an act of trust. Trust in timing. Trust in outcome. Trust that God would speak louder through events than you ever could through explanation. And that trust has been honored. Because the truth has arrived without your defense. This is the part that humbles her most. She realizes that your silence removed her power to frame the story. There was no argument to win. No position to outmaneuver. No narrative to dominate. Only time, and time revealed what words never could. That is why the realization shook her. Because it means you were never beneath the situation. You were above it, waiting. And waiting at that level requires strength few possess. Now the dynamic has fully changed. You are no longer evaluated by what you say, but by what has already occurred around you. The outcomes speak. The patterns confirm. The alignment is visible. And even those who never expected to respect your restraint now recognize it as authority. This is not admiration, it is acknowledgement. And acknowledgement alters behavior. You may notice it now: fewer challenges, more hesitation. Less dismissal, more curiosity. People are recalculating. Not because you demanded recognition, but because silence made room for truth to assert itself. This is divine justice without spectacle. Understand this clearly: the silence did not end because it failed. It ended because it completed its assignment. What needed to be revealed has been revealed. What needed to be exposed has surfaced. What needed to mature has reached readiness. Now comes expression, but expression guided, not impulsive. When you speak next, whether through words, actions, or decisions, it will land differently. Not because you changed your tone, but because the environment has changed. Ears are open now that resistance has collapsed. Hearts are receptive now that denial has been exhausted. This is why timing mattered. She understands now that God was not protecting her from you, He was protecting the moment from being wasted. And that realization closes the chapter completely. There is no returning to misunderstanding. No rewriting the past. Only acceptance of what was necessary. And acceptance brings peace. For you, that peace is not passive, it is preparatory. It steadies your steps, sharpens your discernment, grounds your authority. You are entering a phase where silence is no longer required, but wisdom still governs speech. Speak only when aligned. Move only when clear. Act only when led. The season ahead will test restraint in a different way, not by forcing quiet, but by tempting reaction. Remember what carried you this far. Stillness. Timing. Trust. You were never overlooked. You were never dismissed by heaven. You were being trained for weight. And now the weight is shifting into influence. This is the end of the silence, but not the end of depth. What follows will be visible, undeniable, and quietly powerful. Those who once questioned will watch. Those who once misunderstood will reflect. And those who once doubted will adjust. Because the truth has settled. And once it does, nothing needs to be said anymore. What God kept silent has now spoken, through alignment, outcome, and unmistakable timing.